Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
How's
Good
everybody?
afternoon.
We've got it all together here. What's going on in the world of public education this week? Anybody have anything special?
We had administrative retreat today and tomorrow.
Ooh, that sounds like so much fun.
Where you going?
We didn't go anywhere. We retreated to where we are. We actually, and we did, I mean, I presented this today, and we pretty much, I said, I asked them last year, can we have like a differentiated PD? Because not everybody is on the same level. We need to be, different things. And so they listened this year. That was nice. So I presented about school improvement, about the master schedule, the school improvement team, instructional monitoring, and things like that. So it was good. We really pretty much had some of our principals who are doing some really good things to present. So that was nice instead of bringing in somebody. I like that a little bit better. So.
Yeah, that's better than the normal standard routine of one size fits nobody.
That's right.
That's kind of like, we do standard things, but because we've always done them, what I refer to as usual customary practices, not because they work or there's any efficacy to them, just because we've always done them.
Right.
Whether it works or not.
Exactly. We don't, and see, that's arduous double loop theory. We don't assess whether it works or not, but because we've always done it, we say that, well, it's not my fault it didn't work if it doesn't work because I did the right things. Well, no, if they didn't work, they weren't the right things. And so, that this kicks off the first lesson in statistics to my doctoral students, understanding correlation, relationships, variance, all those things. And, Dr. Argyris introduced us to the double loop theory, of learning, which of course is the personification of that in civilian life is the theory of insanity. Do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. That's actually a theory in organizations, business theory. Dr. Argyris from Harvard, that was his claim to fame that he did. But again, we do it because we've always done it, not because it works.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to get out of that mode of doing things. No. Now, what made me think of retreat? That was I had an instant flashback. Anna's Dr. Maraglia is just about old enough to remember. Now, she's not old enough to have done it, but she might remember back in the early years of the John Murphy administration in Charlotte.
Going to Boone.
We used to go to Boone. We used to stay at the Broyhill Center. But, I rode up there about 2 or 3 weeks ago. They tore the Broyhill Center down. It got so old and disrepair. It was the motel up the top of Mountaineer Drive where was a business conference center. Broyhill sponsored it at a hotel. And even when we stayed there, by the time that we stayed there, it was pretty rough. It was about like a Howard Johnson's by the time that we stayed there. But yeah, we used to go up there every summer and they would truck all those people in, and it was just beyond crazy. But Dr. Murphy would get drunk as Otis on Mayberry and try to cook steaks, about burnt the place down one time. He was bad to drink, as they used to say back in my era when I was a kid. He's bad to drink. And so
I can't imagine any CMS superintendent cooking out for his principals.
Oh yeah, we played golf and we had all kind of activities. Had a big golf outing and did all that stuff, and then we had a big cookout. And they about burnt the backside of the Broyhill Center off. They put too much lighter fluid on it, blew everybody's eyebrows off. But yeah, that's absolutely a true story because I was there. That was olden times, though. You'd never get away with stuff like that today. All right, it's time to get started. Welcome everybody. Glad you showed up this week. I've got a couple of things. I want to call out Claire, Kitty, and Todd, who have all finished their OMA and gotten 4s. So congratulations to Claire, Kitty, and Todd for that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give them maybe a week break. So next week, unless somebody twists my arm, next week when we come online, I'm going to cover the skip. Now the materials are in our Blackboard shell, but if you want to get started on your next evidence before you leave me this summer, so that you will have some direction and maybe could work on your own the rest of this summer, or the nearly month that you'll have off from classes. If you're one of those people who likes to work ahead, I will cover the skip in depth next week, just like I did the CAP. I mean, just like I did the OMA earlier. I'll cover the skip in depth. I would recommend, if you could knock out your skip and CAP by the end of the fall, where all you had to do in your spring was to solve. I think what I notice is students have more time to focus on their competency folio and making it much better. That competency folio is really, that is something that has really become popular in terms of having that portfolio to take to and let prospective employers see it. That's become a really hot and popular thing. Folks want to see those. And what generally happens, we're in such a rush to complete the last semester, you have you're scheduled to do the CAP and the SOP, but if you could kind of knock out half of the skip this summer, the other half, and then get the CAP in the fall, you would have the semester just to do the SOP. You could devote a lot of that time to cleaning up and fixing up and shining up your competency folio. Now, I said that to say this: these ladies this summer, Drs. Maraglia and Dr. Caton, they will work with you on your competency folio. You need to go ahead and, if you've already finished especially the folks who are at the end or near the end of the OMA, you need to focus a little bit on your competency folio this coming week. Put some artifacts in there, match those competencies. If you have questions, contact your coaches. And they will work with you exclusively. They have task stream access, they have expertise. They will help you with your competency folio to catch up for this semester. As you know, you need to do half. Just the competencies that you wrote in task 4 of the OMA, we would expect to see an artifact in those 12 competencies as well. We would expect to see an artifact in those 12 competencies as well this summer. If you need help, see Dr. Caton and Dr. Maraglia. We'll give you this week coming to kind of catch up on that for those of you who have finished your OMA. And then next week, I will talk to you about the skip. So that's where we are. I don't want to take any more time. I do want to show you a couple of things before we start our case study tonight, just so that you can be looking for this stuff in case you're interested. You will need your teacher working condition survey. Most specifically, what you will need is, don't tell me mine. Okay. Here we go. Most specifically for the skip, you're going to need the community support and involvement piece from the North Carolina Teacher Working Conditions Survey. Now, again, I like the middle column on that survey. You're going to have to use that section, and you're also going to have to use this section. And don't get it twisted. You're going to have to use the school leadership section. You're going to need both of those sections in skip task 1, not teacher leadership. You've already used it. We're going to need school leadership, and we're going to need community support and involvement. This is when you do your needs assessment for gaps in communication between the community or parents and the school. You're only going to do a needs assessment on gaps in communication, not anything else. And I'll rant that next week. But this is what you're going to need: is your TWC for the community support piece, and you're going to need school leadership piece. Now, if you have advanced ed, if you're in South Carolina and it's Cognia Advanced Ed, you have the same basic survey. But also some schools and school districts have a parent survey that they do. Advanced Ed also has a parent survey. Now, some districts use it, South Carolina, some districts choose, and some in North Carolina choose to use that. If your school does a parent survey, it would be good to look at that data as well for that gaps in communication between your parent community and your school. You have to look at TWC, but if you've got a parent survey, you should look at that as well. Parent information, look on your website, and usually you will know if your parents have done one. CMS does do one. A lot of the bigger districts do. South Carolina does. Advanced Ed does have a parent survey. So be looking for those materials, and then I'll tell you what to do with them once we do that next week. Again, let's see, there's our scores from Kitty and Claire and Todd. Again, congratulations to them. All right, any questions before we dive in tonight? All right, so let's switch browsers here and go back to this side. This is case study 2. All right, so just an overarching, some overarching thoughts before we start tonight. When we look at administrative malpractice, it has three different types. Malfeasance is you intentionally did the wrong thing. We've talked about liability for malpractice, having to go to court, lose your house. In our first case study 2 weeks ago was a case of malfeasance. The teacher intentionally did the wrong thing. It wasn't about any more than a teacher denied a kid due process, arbitrarily and very capriciously punished a child with a illegal zero tolerance suspension. Question is, what as a principal are you going to do? All the other stuff was just fluff to scare you and to get you down rabbit holes and have discussions and make you unsure. The teacher intentionally did the wrong thing. She malpracticed on a kid through malfeasance. All right, so the others are that we'll cover in our case studies this summer is misfeasance. Unintentionally did the wrong thing. Might have been for a good reason, but still broke the law, did the wrong thing. And then eventually we'll get to intentionally did not act when they had a duty to act. And so those are the standards for malpractice. That's the theme that runs through our case studies this summer. And so without further ado, I'm going to call on William, Matthew, and Elizabeth/Diane to be our first presenters of the evening. I'll stop my.
All right. Yep.
And I will turn off my video, which usually helps you get online a little better.
All right. We can all see this. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Elizabeth, Matthew, you good? Ready to go? I can't see
good.
that. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, good evening. As we know, and as we read, this case study revolves around the topic of school budgeting and how funds can be administered. I'm using that word can rather than should, because that's going to be important for what we talk about as we talk about the role of the superintendent in this particular case. And so the focus of this presentation will be to address the legal perspectives this case study poses by making connections between the case law and this particular case. We will also discuss some of the ethical concerns that are posed upon the administrator and as it relates to the school budgeting generally, but also to this specific case. All right, so let's begin. So before addressing the key question that we'll pose of the case study, I want to provide a little bit of context to the complexity of school finance and budgeting, which we all know is a very complex topic. Across districts, states, equity in school funding has been a long-standing and difficult issue for all stakeholders to address. And as we know, these decision makers and decision-making stakeholders include not only the school and district administrators, but also our elected officials. As it relates to this case, it's important to note that budgets passed in the General Assembly here in the state of North Carolina, along with county commissioners and judicial rulings, have the ultimate authority over how funding can be allocated and not local administrators. Comparatively, other stakeholders such as parents and teachers have very minimal roles in the budgeting process, something that I think is a really common misconception among the general public. So school finance decision-making at all levels focuses on both budgeting processes as well as budgeting models, which includes the traditional processes such as line item and zero-based budgeting, but also more needs-based processes such as the student and site-based budgeting, as well as priority-based budgeting. These needs-based approaches are geared towards ultimately providing more equity in funding to the high-need schools and districts, which is a goal that I think certainly was on the mind of the superintendent as he wrote his letter to his district's parents and students. All right, so to address now the key question of concern, regardless of the superintendent's goal or motive, the question of concern for this case study is how is school finance law administered and interpreted as it relates to school and district budgets? And so to answer this question, we really need to analyze the case law to determine the responsibilities that administrators have as they distribute funds. And so the first and most important case to really review and analyze is the precedent-setting case of Leandro versus the state of North Carolina. And so this is the single most important case that establishes really the key precedent regarding who can appropriate funding for schools and how they can be appropriated in different districts and different counties. This case was brought to court in 1994, but it really didn't end with final decision until 1997. Now, to give an overview of the case, just a brief overview, the lead plaintiffs in this case were the Leandro family that lived in Halifax County. Halifax County was one of the 5 low wealth counties, along with the high needs, classified as a high needs county, that filed a lawsuit against the state. And their suit claimed that the state was not providing equal educational experience for students in these counties compared to the other wealthier counties across the state. And so the plaintiffs argued that neither geography or family income should be factors that affect a child's education. And they did this by highlighting that higher costs that come with educating students is certainly a burden for those districts. And again, this also includes students that not only come from low-income families, but also rural communities, which is what classified these five counties that initially were a part of the suit. There were some urban districts that later joined the suit, but these first 5 counties that brought the suit all came from fairly rural school districts. So the evidence that the plaintiffs used to support their claims and was cited in the suit included things like inadequate facilities, outdated book collections in their media centers, lack of technology, and most importantly, their inability to hire highly qualified teachers and principals due to their lack of competitive compensation. And that was a key piece of evidence that the judges across multiple courts reviewed as they made their decisions. Not only did they cite evidence from the counties, but the plaintiffs also cited key language from the North Carolina Constitution to justify their position. And so the first key piece of language they used came from Article 1, Section 15, which states that the people have a right to the privilege of education, and it is the duty of the state to guard and maintain that right. They also used language from Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution that states the General Assembly shall provide by taxation and otherwise for a general and uniform system of free public schools shall be maintained at least 9 months in every year, and where equal opportunities shall be provided for all students. So that was really the constitutional language that these plaintiffs were using to support their case. Litigants from the states argued the claims made by the plaintiffs were ones that were political in nature. They were political questions that should really only be addressed by the General Assembly and not through a judicial ruling. And so that was kind of the counter argument that the state made as they were addressing their case. All right, so to now address the outcomes of, again, this precedent case, it came to be that in a unanimous opinion written by the Chief Justice at the time of the State Supreme Court, Burley Mitchell, the court ruled that all children have the right to have the opportunity to receive a sound basic education. And those three words are really the precedent of what students' rights and their education are, a sound basic education. And so as the court stated, this also includes having competent and well-trained teachers, not only teachers, but principals as well, along with sufficient resources. And so this became known as the Leandro Doctrine. It's what's used today to determine if schools and districts are providing a sound basic education along with state in providing a sound basic education to students across the state. All right, so in addition, the court also held that neither school districts nor counties had a constitutional right to equal funding, but rather that it was the state's responsibility to ensure that the Leandro Doctrine was upheld for every student. And so what this means is that individual counties, such as the ones that were a part of the suit in this case, cannot reallocate funds already appropriated by the assembly or perhaps their county commissioners at the local level. In addition, the court established a qualitative standard of what a sound basic education is defined as, and there were kind of four doctrines, I should say, that were addressed here. And I think most of you maybe referenced this particular side. I think this is what Dr. Lamb had on his screen earlier, but these were really the four standards that define the qualitative standard that the decision really defined in its Leandro Doctrine. And I won't read through all those, but those are ones that the ruling stated as well in its decision. But again, there was no quantitative standard of what defines a sound basic education. And that means that equity of funds across school districts is not guaranteed. So one other thing I do want to address is the case law that came after, again, this precedent case. And that is, I'm just going to kind of highlight three particular cases, but there have been plaintiffs in several other cases that have cited the decision in the Leandro case and have used that precedent set in the case to argue that basic education is not being provided to all students. So in one case, this first case I'll mention here, which was really kind of an extension off the first Leandro case. I feel like hearing me rant for a second. Just go.
feel like hearing me rant, just go. If you don't feel like
I'm hearing background noise.
just go.
But
If you don't feel like hearing me rant, just go. If you don't feel like hearing me rant.
Okay, William, you'll have to unmute yourself.
okay.
Okay, we're there. We go. We're good.
All right. So in a 2004 case, which again was kind of an extension of the first Leandro case, Hope County Board of Education, which was again one of the 5 counties part of that first Leandro case, in the Hope County Board of Education versus the state of North Carolina, the same court found that at-risk students, also included in this case, pre-K students, were denied the right to a basic education. And so there was a lot of evidence, of just a whole abundance of evidence that the Hope County Board of Education brought to the court to show that those students in that county had significant educational disadvantages that, again, did not meet the constitutional criteria. Another case that cited the Leandro Doctrine was one from 2008, where a nonprofit group that was representing parents in Wake County sued the Board of Education due to the district forcing students to attend year-round schools rather than traditional 9-month schools. And that caused obviously an uproar from parents there to having their students forced into year-round schools. And again, as the Leandro Doctrine states, all districts must provide equal opportunities for students to receive a sound basic education. And again, it's something that multiple courts, hearing this case, it went through the whole series of lower courts and up to the Supreme Court. Multiple courts had to address the doctrine as it relates to the role of year-round schools. And then finally, I'll mention this last case here of King versus the Beaufort County Board of Education. And this was another case that was brought to the Supreme Court in 2010, where the court found that the Leandro Doctrine also applies to suspended students and their right to receive an alternative education. Access to a sound basic education also applies to students who have been suspended. All right, and the last thing that I'll show here is a timeline, a timeline here that shows how the Leandro Doctrine has been first created, but also applied over recent years. Again, it was first established here in 1997 by the Supreme Court under Justice, blanking on his name at the moment,
Charlie Mitchell.
Thank you. But from there, it was upheld in, again, that Hope County Board of Education versus the state in 2004. And then we see here that there's been a jump going to 2017, where when Governor Cooper was elected and took office, he created a commission around this Leandro Doctrine and how it's being applied across the state. And so it was found that obviously sound basic education is not something that is fully guaranteed across all counties. And so it led to the creation of what's called this West Ed report that was recommended by Judge Lee to ultimately have a consultant create. And from there to the point today, the West Ed is really the primary document that is being used to try to achieve sound basic education across all school districts. But that is obviously on pause and was on pause in 2020 when the pandemic hit. All right, I'll turn it over to Matthew.
All right. So can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, good. All right, so we felt that the superintendent's plan is not appropriate. For like example, My school district has 3 high schools. We would call them School A, School B, and School C. School A has 1,200 students, and School B has 800 students, and School C has 500 students. With the superintendent's plan, School A would get the most money than any other school. School C would get the least amount, and it's probably the school that would need the most out of the 3 schools. Programs and positions may get cut from School B and C, like athletic teams, band, and also teacher or non-certified staff members. Now we'll talk about the pros and the cons of the superintendent plan. So for the pros, this plan would help the school who has the most students, who would normally get the same amount of money as everyone else. This plan may help bring more jobs to the bigger schools, and this plan may help fund new and existing programs for students. And for the cons, this plan would give some schools less money than they had the year before. With this plan, some schools may have to let some of its employees go. With this plan, students may have to relocate to another school because their current school may not have resources that they had the previous years. Schools will have to make a fundraise board and also raise dues to make up for the money lost. And the superintendent needs to get approval from the school board before he can start this plan.
Okay, and now I'm just gonna go into the legal and ethical concerns of the role of the principal. Some terms that might be important to remember is law. You cannot manipulate local, state, and federal monies. That is illegal. Ethical, you want to follow the law, and policy. Good administrators make their decisions based on law, not the way that they feel that the school should be run. And then policy, the county commissioner is over all procedures of the superintendent. So what he did was wrong. The superintendent cannot take away from federal and state funds, but he can spend leftover money where he sees fit, which is called the general fund. And he can use local money for his plan with the school board approval. And then some other terms that you might want to think about when you're thinking about the legal and ethical concerns is justice, what would be fair and equitable. And then care, the superintendent cares about the well-being and success of all students. Profession, you want to accounts for student success. You want to safeguard the values of equity and diversity and maintain the best interest of all the students in the schools.
All right, and that's it.
Okay. All right, so let me run through that right quick for you and kind of summarize. All right. In 1954, remember our court cases from our first or second week. So let's run through our court cases that are relevant right quick. 1954, Brown versus Board of Education said separate's not equal. You gotta quit running a dual school system across America. Nothing happened for 11 years. Everybody just sat and looked at one another and said, okay, and went on about their business. 1965, the Civil Rights Act was passed, and all of a sudden that was a commandment that schools were going to have to desegregate. As a result, some states were unwilling or did not like that. It was very unpopular, North Carolina being one of them. I was a student at the time, and so when schools started to desegregate in 1966, the North Carolina General Assembly said, we're out. We're out of the school funding business in terms of capital. We will not build any more schools. We don't believe in this, and we're not going to do it. So they shifted their capital money to building community colleges, and that's why we have 58 community and technical colleges, along with multiple satellite campuses, about 3 times more than we need, because the big builders in North Carolina were no longer building public schools. They started building public community colleges. And so the burden of capital, which is buildings, grounds, technology, All those things that the low wealth counties said that they were having trouble with, and the ability to supplement teachers to get and keep highly qualified teachers and hire extra teachers. Y'all, none of y'all are old enough to remember getting a paper check when you were a teacher. I am. There used to be, Kitty's nodding. Kitty said, I agree, you're old enough, Dale. She's not saying she's old enough. She's agreeing that I'm old enough. But checks used to come in one of three colors. When you got your monthly check, it was either pink, green, say yellow, green, or blue. Yellow, green, or blue, according to what fund you were paying from. Federal teachers got a yellow check, I believe it was, if you were CTE or special ed or some of those things. Your state, your regular positions, but if you were a locally hired teacher, I believe that was a green check, if you were a locally hired teacher. Well, in 1966, when the state said we're no longer going to fund building schools, individual districts have to take care of their own capital needs. That sucked up all the extra money that to hire or supplement teachers. It also burdened low wealth districts because they didn't have the tax base. And so they did not have the ability to add to the standard now $8,000 per pupil that the state sends to educate children for that basic education. That came out in 1984. The state said that every child must get the basic ed plan. That's another one of those things. 1984 said every kid gets a free and appropriate basic education. Well, in 93, basically 10 years later, the Leandro lawsuit was saying we're not getting that. We got kids in our districts because of the funding formula has flat. Everybody gets $8. Back then it was $6, but now it's $8,000 per pupil. What we want the state to do is give the high wealth districts less state money. They can still add their local money in, but take that money that we don't give to the Charlottes of the world and give it to the Hope counties of the world. So in the end, they get equal funding. So for example, I'll use today's dollars. If the state allots $8,000 per pupil, and the local can add $4, like in Charlotte, that'd be a total of $12,000 to educate every child. What the Andrew lawsuit was about was give them 6, give us 10. They'll add their 4 to their 6, and we'll both end up with 10. The decision from Leandro was no. You can't manipulate that. Not only did they say the state didn't do that, they said the locals can't do it either. They specifically forbade the locals to manipulate that either. And you're right, school boards are unempowered. They can't levy their own taxes. It all comes through either the 100 county commissioners for the 100 county school districts in North Carolina, and there's 15 or 14 city districts that comes through their city commissioners for their town. But it has to come through there to the school district. The school district can't decide. So the issue with Leandro is manipulate the amount of money coming in from the state. And the Leandro group, which I was a part of, lost that side. And so we did not affect that. And so not only does the state not have to give money according to need, the local can't do that either. They can't manipulate those funds. And so the bottom line in this case is it's illegal to do the superintendent's plan. Now, we could argue the pros and cons, and that's fine. But the first thing we have to say is this legal? Now, a point was made. There is a general fund that superintendents can use to spend on things that they want to, and there's a limit that they can spend without having to get board approval. However, that's got to be leftover money. You can't take money earmarked for one school or that's been line itemed in the local budget approved by the county commissioners. You can't take that money and manipulate it. Again, that's what the Leandro lawsuit says. You can't manipulate that money. Now, if you attempt to, as the former superintendent in Chapel Hill Carrboro did 2 years ago, what she attempted to do was get some extra help to schools, just like this superintendent. And she knew that she couldn't hire anybody to do that. So she hired a firm that was going to come in and do equity. Basically, they were going to give extra teachers and resources to schools. And of course, it hadn't been approved by the board. It couldn't be. It's illegal to do that. So what she did was contracted with them and said, I'm going to use my discretionary money, which she's allowed to use up to $90,000 And so she had the $1 million contract broke up into 12 payments of just slightly less than 90,000. Of course, that was illegal. You can only do it one time, and it hadn't been board approved. It was not for contracts. So she and the finance officer were fired in Chapel Hill, Carborough. That was 2 summers ago. And so as you try to work around this, there is no workaround. Money has to follow the students. You can't move federal money, you can't move state money, and you can't move your local money. So there is no money for the superintendent to move into this plan. It's all illegal. Now you say, but kids aren't getting their basic education. That is true. So the state did offer relief in the form of the education lottery. That's how we got the education lottery in North and South Carolina, is to try to get some extra money into the equation. Of course, that's been wholly unsuccessful because it all gets siphoned off for other things. But in the end, the efficacy of the argument, that these kids need this, it costs more to educate, we'll concede all those arguments. But if the kernel of truth in the Leandro case is it's illegal to differentiate the money, whether it's federal, state, or local money, you cannot do that. We have a flat grant formula of funding in North Carolina and South Carolina, and the bottom line on that is you can't take any actions to try to circumvent that law. Even though it might be for the right reasons, it might be for good reasons, doesn't matter. The first question you have to ask is it legal or illegal? In this case, it is illegal to manipulate that money. So the superintendent's plan is not appropriate, it is illegal. All right. So make sure I understand everybody. I get all my points there. So excellent presentation. I'm going to go to our resident principals for their comment. I'll start with Dr. Caton.
I'm sorry. I'm not sure what comment you want me to say. You kind of said it all, Dr. Lamb.
Well, I know, but what I want you to say is, how does that affect your school or district that you're in? What is the manifestation of that in Pitt County?
So for me, money is something that I'm always preaching about. I really feel that we are not allotted money based off of need. It's always given based off of ADM. And for me, I am a school that has only 650 students. I do not get any additional funding at all. I don't get Title I, even though we qualify for Title I. Pitt County Schools only gives Title I monies to K-8 schools. They do not give it to any of the high schools because there's not but so much Title I monies to go around. Pitt County Schools does give equity money for athletics. Ever since I have been at Aiden-Grifton, I've always asked for equity money for academics because of some of the schools in our district. Our larger schools have parental support boosters, things like that. They're getting thousands of dollars. I do not have a PTA. I do not have a PTO. I do not have all that extra money. Parking lot, there's some schools that make $60,000, $75,000 in parking lot money that they can use. I don't have that. And so I'm always begging for money for my school and always asking for equity money for academics, always.
Yeah, that's the life of the low wealth ends, even across districts. See, one of the things that we make the mistake when Dr. Tate referred to as ADM, that's average daily membership. Remember, you get paid for the number of students who show up daily, not the number on your roster. But one of the things that we have this notion that if you're in a high wealth district, like say Charlotte, that you're in a high wealth school. That is not true. Mm-hmm. There are schools in Pitt County that would be considered high wealth. Aiden-Grifton would not be one of those. Same in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. Dr. Maraglia, she's on the west side now.
Yep. Well, one thing I wanted to say was I just learned something from you, Dr. Caton. I didn't realize that districts could withhold money from schools that qualify for Title I. I did not know that. So that was something that was very new to me. But I think that you could, even though, again, Charlotte-Mecklenburg would be one of those that they wanted to take money from, you can see a huge disparity. I have been at schools where we had a very active PTA and they raised thousands and thousands of dollars to do all kinds of wonderful things for the school. I happen to be at a school now where we also don't have a PTA, and it takes a lot of hustling and trying to get some sponsors to do things for our kids. So even within a district that is considered wealthy, our school wouldn't be considered that at all. And it's interesting also to see it from a parent standpoint as well, because my kids go to a school that is not considered wealthy, and I see athletics, what they have at some schools and what their booster clubs have done for them. But we're at a school with a booster club that's not very active, and the disparity is glaring, even within a district.
And all of that is amplified and multiplied in the era of charter and private schools now. So funding discrepancies are everywhere.
They are everywhere.
And the notion here is it's a worthy idea or ideal to try to equalize, bring equity to these situations. But your hands are tied legally, because we have folks who, just like in the 60s, in my era, didn't want schools to desegregate. We have people now who don't want schools to have equity. The notion of privilege or advantage, you know, as a former elementary principal, and yes, I was for 5 years. I know it's hard to believe that I was ever an elementary principal, and the kids love me for some reason. I have no idea why. I've seen parents hold one kid back, you know, the parent helpers hold one kid back so their kid could get in front of them in line. It's almost like we have to have somebody to beat. We decry and we complain about inequities, but we continue to support systems that support inequities in schools. And that's the sad part, is we could fix this tomorrow if we wanted to. We don't have the will to fix it. We like the inequities.
Now, I cannot get, I mean, Dr. Margoli, you know, I did not either. I cannot get a direct answer about the Title I monies. When you go on to DPI's website, it says that Aiken-Griffin is a Title I school. So when I saw that, of course, I started asking questions. Of course, all my feeders are Title I. And then also we are free and reduced lunch for all students as well. You know, they gave us that last year. Year before last. So I don't know the answer about, because I thought so too. If you were Title I, you're supposed to get the money, but I pretty much was told that there was not enough money to go around for everybody.
So Dr. Lamb, not to put Pitt County in the hot seat, but is that legal?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've just never seen a school that they said they weren't getting their Title I. I mean, the high schools in CMS get an exorbitant amount of Title I money.
Yeah. The local can write a waiver to the federal Department of Education that their high schools not participate for a number of reasons. They are allowed to do that. It's only high schools now. You can't have an elementary or middle school where you would do that. But a high school can, it is legal for them to write a waiver, and high schools not participate in Title I.
Now, let me tell everybody something, and I'm not sure what your county will do. Some counties, like the superintendent, tells you this is your money, this is what you're going to spend it on. However, in Pitt County, it's not that way. And so every year they put out, you know, how much local money or Title I money was rolled over. And I am the very first person to look at that. And I see how much money was rolled over, and I'm not very happy. And I'll be very honest with you, in Pitt County, we have a deadline that purchase orders have to be done by April 1.
Yeah,
and I'll tell you, but I'm gonna tell you what I do, because I used to work at the central office. I know how it works. I have a wish list, and I will send you I'll send you 3 or 4, you know, good purchase orders. I'll send them to the finance person, and I'll say, if you are in need of spending money quick, because that happens a lot, here are some things that I want. So that's what I do. You know, that's things that I've already spent my money, but I know there are schools that give away $40,000, $50,000 back. I see it at least in my county, and it makes me mad because I'm begging for money. So
Yeah.
I will send up quickly in about March or February. I'll say, hey, you know, my person's name is Deborah. Hey, Deborah, here's some wish list for me. And I don't tell anybody else in my county my secret because I know it. I know what happens because they're looking to spend money quick. And if they look, there's purchase orders, they're mine, and they're going to go ahead and send them in.
We have the same thing. We have schools that they don't spend their money. I know we spend our money pretty much up to the penny,
Yes.
but we definitely have schools that are not using their money.
And it
But we have some
frustrates
schools
me.
that are getting, I mean, it blows my mind the amount of money they're getting.
Mhm.
Yes.
Well,
I don't want to say something.
having been a part of the meetings, I can't speak for Pitt County, but I can tell you what the discussion is, why high schools wouldn't be designated in a district as Title I. Title I helps the lowest kids, kids who are not going to be college bound, but being designated a Title I high schools affects college entrance and scholarships and getting kids into colleges. There is a negative connotation coming out of a Title I high school. And so the irony is, in order that we facilitate kids who are doing better in school already that are going to be college bound, we punish the lower end kids by not getting them Title I money so that the upper kids can graduate from a high school that's not designated a Title I high school. That is the argument. They're not saying that those kids don't need it. What they're saying is it will hurt the college chances of the upper end kids at Aiden Griffin if that is declared a Title I high school. That colleges don't like to take students from those schools, and that is true.
Well, that might clear something up for you, Dr. Caton.
And so,
well, then if you're not going to do that, like I said, give me some equity money. You give me equity money for athletics, give me equity money for academics, period. If you're not going to make me Title I, which is fine, give me some extra money.
Yeah, but we don't want to do that again. We don't truly want equity. We want certain kids to be facilitated and do well, not so much with all kids. We're not really that much interested in all kids. And certainly not one group of kids at the expense of another. We certainly not willing to help a low kid at the expense of the high kid. And that's the perception of Title I, is if we take on that designation that my child will have a hard time, that's on his transcript, will have a hard time getting into the college of his choice. And so, again, these are a lot of societal issues that we have. Just simply because we're public education doesn't mean that the public is in it for the common good of all kids.
Or the government
started,
or the General Assembly. Or the General Assembly.
Yeah, exactly. They're not interested in every kid getting quality.
Absolutely not.
You know, so that's that. Excellent job. That was our first group tonight. Let me go backwards here. Okay, America and Ryan and Brianna and Michael and Mary. Y'all are up next. Tell us what y'all think.
Okay. All right, so we started off with chapter 2, and it is the school and the legal environment. So chapter 2, it stated that its purpose was to remind principals to remember the foundations of how laws are made and how said laws affect the decision-making process of the courts and the school district council. So chapter 2 is broken up into 6 sections, and each section has focus points. I'm sorry, please excuse my kids, they're upstairs, so they're not even by me. The first section is the foundations of the school's relationship to the legal environment, and its focus points are the basic principles of our legal system, constitutional, common, statutory, and administrative law, how laws are made and enforced, and it talks about the 3 branches of law. The second section is the clauses of and amendments to the U.S. Constitution that affect education practice, and that is the General Welfare Clause, the first, fourth, fifth, 14th amendments, and then it's Articles 2 through 6 and Amendments 6 through 11 and 13. Section 3 focus on the landmark Supreme Court rulings that affect education practice. And this is where our focus will be at. It talks about desegregation, school finance, student and teacher rights, special education, and then church and state. Section 4, it highlights of selected portions of federal statutes that affect education practice, like Title I, FERPA, the Americans with Disability Act, IDEA, ADEA, the Rehab Act, the Equal Education Opportunity Act, FMLA, and No Child Left Behind. The next section focused on workers' comp, which just tells us the general provisions regarding workers' compensation. Then it had the legal status of school choice, legislation governing charter schools and school vouchers, and then the statute of limitations for federal cases. And it provided examples of Supreme Court cases on education, such as Plessy versus Ferguson, Askew versus Hargrave, Bell versus New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and Gordon versus Lance. So back to section 3, which school finance. So there were several cases that arose in the early 1970s. In between 1972 and 1989, there were many battles over equality of fiscal inputs. So the kind of like the turning point case during that time was the Rose versus Council for Better Education, which happened in 1989. And through this case, the court kind of took a more thorough look at what states meant when they said that schools were supposed to provide a thorough education. So because of this decision, it pretty much made states look at what they were doing and what they were providing, and it required them to provide not only equal inputs, but also equality in all uses of money, implying that opportunity is defined by not only the mere distributional attributes of a state and formula, but also how money is spent on behalf of each child. Because of this, now state legislators have heightened the demands for fiscal accountability. So if someone has an issue and they bring it up about this, it's almost like it kind of speeds up the process of how they look at it.
Please remember right here that in 1984, North Carolina, and 5 years prior to this, passed the basic ed plan that said the same thing, that
Okay.
every kid gets a basic education. And by 1989, when this ruling came down, North Carolina had fully implemented the standard course of study, which was North Carolina's version of what a basic education was.
Okay.
So those are most relevant to us in that basic ed plan. Every child gets a basic ed, same decision as Rose made 5 years later. And by 89, when this ruling came out, North Carolina had a plan in place as to what the question, when you say every kid gets a basic education, question is, what is a basic education? You have to define that. So the state spent 5 years and millions of dollars, but they wrote a complete state curriculum in every course and every grade level, and said, this is it. They were in white notebooks. Some of you might be old enough to remember those big, thick white notebooks with the North Carolina standard course of study. And so that was all taken care of. The issue becomes, how do you fund that thing? Not that you get it, but how do you fund it? That's what Dr. Kate was talking about. We know what we're supposed to do. The issue is where do you get the money to do it?
Okay.
Right? Excuse me, continue.
So just as a quick refresher for the case study, the superintendent tried a new system to equity and funding decisions. It was at 4 different schools called student-based budgeting, which will allocate money to schools based on the number of students enrolled and based on their specific needs as well. And there were certain students' needs that have a predetermined weight of how much money each school will receive, such as grade levels and the number of at-risk learners. So after discussing it with other principals and working out the kinks, he decided to go with this system and said that not every school is the same, and this will give greater confidence that money is following students. And he wanted to make transparent budget decisions. So principals will reach out to parents to explain how they can be engaged and involved and figure out the whole process.
So the Leonardo case started in 1994, and it continues on to today. It started with 5 low-wealth school districts suing the state of North Carolina. That was Cumberland, Halifax, Hoke, Robinson, and Vance. The reason they were suing was because students in these 5 counties were being denied their constitutional right to a sound and basic education. And there was also claims that the state's funding was insufficient. The state's response to this was pretty much that they were to provide the school, the teachers, and textbooks. And that was, the court had said that that was not okay. You can go to the next slide. So to relate this case to our case study, the superintendent wanted to decide district funding based on student needs, which was just a priority-based budgeting method. And according to Leonardo, this is not something that the superintendent can do. Fundings for schools in that manner.
All right, the next part that we looked at was, is the superintendent's plan appropriate? And of course, we already know that it's illegal. I think we've established that, but just looking at the facets of the plan and the different components in it, how could it be considered appropriate? It does address the needs of the students in the school and pushes forward to a favorable outcome. The superintendent will have the ability to allocate the funds for the Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Can you go back? Okay. So we'll start over. So what was the superintendent's plan? The implementation of the SBB was to allocate the money or the funds directly to schools based on the number of students and also based on the specific needs of the students in the building. We know ultimately that the plan is illegal, but some parts of it that could be considered appropriate were that it addresses the needs of the students in the school and pushes to a favorable outcome. The superintendent will have the ability to allocate the funds to the needed areas. This will provide equal access to resources regardless of socioeconomic status or location within the county, giving priority to student needs above everything else. And the superintendent expresses desire to remain transparent and open about the funding. So I mean, those things are appropriate, but ultimately the plan is inappropriate. And we're able to see that because the superintendent has to ensure that the money is being distributed equitably, and who's going to check that? Who's the one that, if he's the one that's in charge of it, there's got to be somebody to go behind him and check to make sure he's done it right. Then you got the issue of, where does the school board fit into this? I mean, he didn't mention them at all, but I'm sure that they have to have some say so if he's going to be in charge of the money. And so what is their role going to be in that process? What does that look like? And then another part is to make sure that or to show that it's inappropriate, it doesn't have anywhere in there where it considers enrollment numbers. Enrollment numbers could change from year to year, even from semester to semester. So when the enrollment number changes, then that means the SBB funding is going to have to change. So then you're going to have to scratch whatever plan you got in place and start all over again. That's going to cause more issues, all right? Then also increase and decrease. I'm sorry, also salaries and any new legislation from the state and federal government. Those things weren't considered in the SBB, because if the state says do this, 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 and those things have to be done, then that changes whatever plan they have for the money. Then the next part is what student performance data is being used to determine the needs of each student at each school. I mean, you know, in high schools, you have EOCs. I mean, which EOC are you going to use to determine which students need what? And then in some cases, I know like in our high school, and I'm sure it's the case in other places, some, depending on the needs of the students, some students don't have to take certain exams. So then how would you even assess their need if you're basing it on performance, all right? And then principal support and sole control. So now the principal, you're going to give him sole control over the money that goes to him or her, sole control over the money that goes to their school. Who's going to be their support system? How are you going to garner community support? Because there's definitely going to be some pushback from this. And then the final thing is the plan illegal in North Carolina? And of course we know that it is, but those were just things that, looking at the plan, that were inappropriate or not addressed, that those questions need to be answered before it just goes full on for everyone.
Some good points there.
Thank you.
It's good points, Ryan. I mean, you've got to realize, just because you think it's a good idea, that doesn't mean that somebody else does. There also needs to be an oversight piece from the school board. That was the piece that I was talking about, Chapel Hill, Carrboro. The superintendent was spending money and even trying to circumvent oversight from her own school board. I mean, there's so many pieces, and it sounds good on paper, but when you get to it, it's illegal. But even if it weren't illegal, you can't just start firing off sending money like this. There's so many other things that are involved in this. And that's an excellent point. Is there's got to be oversight. There's got to be input. There's got to be 1,000 things ever happen before you could implement a plan like this. Even if it were legal, it's not. But even if it were, there's just so many things that are missing from this. Excellent.
So just to continue from Ryan's perspective, with some of the positives, schools will receive funding that helps meet the diverse needs of their students. The superintendent was adamant that money will be following students to the schools. Schools that have more students in need or at risk will receive more funding that will help them meet the needs of their students. Budget decisions will be transparent for stakeholders, which are the parents of students, and then students with greatest need are prioritized. But when you look at the negatives of it, the power is in the hands of the principals to allocate funds, but not the counties. And then just as Ryan was mentioning about enrollment changes, there are certain things that hold predetermined weight of how much money a school receives. So if we're speaking on transparency, where are the guidelines if the numbers change? Again, what Ryan said, if student data still plays a role in the allocation of funds, where are the guidelines for that? I'm at an early childhood school, so we don't have to do EOCs. We just do map testing. So I didn't think about it from that perspective when Ryan mentioned it to the group. And then how do districts plan to provide support for principals who will not have community support? As Dr. Lamb stated earlier, it looks good on paper, but bottom line, it is illegal.
And in terms of ethical paradigms with the case, in terms of justice, the superintendent is using equity of students to allocate the budget funds based on student needs. However, this is against the law, as funding is up to the state to decide, according to Leandro. When it comes to care, the superintendent used the concerns of the principal as the priority to develop the SBB program. Critique the SBB could be appealing to schools with a large population of minority students, since the at-risk students were prioritized for this decision, and they were the basis for the budget decision. And in profession, the superintendent was well-intentional by being responsible for student success. He's attempting to establish equity and social justice for the at-risk learners. But when it came to the Leandro case in 2002, the court found there's a violation of student rights to a sound and basic education. Ordered the state to remedy this violation by providing the resources necessary to support the effective instructional program in every school so that the educational needs of all students, including the at-risk children, have an equal opportunity to obtain a sound and basic education can be met. And that is it.
Okay, so the last piece that Mary covered there on profession, that's basically, in this case, is the definition of misfeasance. Again, we have 3 standards for malpractice. We have malfeasance, like in the last case where a person intentionally harmed the child and knew they were harming the child, but did it anyway. And then you have nonfeasance where you had a duty to act and you didn't. That's not, this case is a case of misfeasance. Did the wrong thing for what he perceived to be the right reason. And that's what I'm talking about, the ethics of your profession. He was well-intentioned, but it was illegal. There was several other issues, looked good on paper, but a lot of other things. And so if you went to court, he would lose his job over this being a misfeasance occurred here, because he's supposed to know. Ignorance of the law. Nobody can give 2 things you got to remember about the law, and you can stop your share now. 2 things you got to remember about the law that you don't remember anything else from this course is, number 1, nobody can give you permission to break the law, ever. You never have permission to break the law. So if somebody tells you can go ahead and do that, and we'll worry about it, no. Nobody can give you permission to break the law. And number 2, ignorance of the law never works in court either. Well, I didn't know this was illegal. That's your response. When you sign the contract and accept the responsibility of that job, you're as assistant principal, assistant superintendent, you are saying, I know and abide and will abide by all the laws that govern this position. I know what they are. That's what you're saying. So nobody can give you permission to break the law. Nobody. And you don't have, and you can never claim that that ignorance of the law is my excuse. Neither one of those will work in court. I'll just tell you right now, neither one, because they're covered under that malpractice, either mispractice, misfeasance, malfeasance, or nonfeasance covers all of those. Just because you didn't know, you're not excused. Because you had, the greater good in mind, that doesn't matter. You got to know. Now, one of the things that was mentioned in this presentation, in the earlier presentation, is kind of one of those things that gets into the ethics of the profession as well, and that is how do you determine what is leftover money or general fund or unspent money? How do you get there? How do you determine that? You say, well, what in the world are you talking about? I worked in a district. I worked in 4 districts, and I had a leadership role in each of those, various leadership roles in each of those 4 districts in my 32 years in the business. I worked in one specific district, and I won't say which one. Some of the guilty might still be there. I worked in a district where the biggest fund balance that they had discretionary, that didn't have any, that wasn't earmarked, that the people in the central office could use, was unused substitute teacher money. So whatever money didn't get used, when teachers can use sick days, or they get 2 annual leave days, as you all know, but you can't take or you get 2 personal days. You can't use annual leave days to miss school when school's in session. You can't use your vacation days when school's in session. So, as you know, if a teacher is out, a substitute has to be employed, and that substitute has to be paid. And so the teacher, in effect, either pays it by using one of their sick days or one of their 2 personal days. That's how that teacher gets paid. What happens if a substitute isn't hired and, say, the team just covers that class, or teachers on planning covers that class? Do they not charge that teacher either for their sick day or their personal day? That would be no. They still charge them, even if they don't disperse those funds to a substitute. So that unused money goes where? It goes to a fund balance. And that money does not have any restrictions on how it can be spent by the folks in the central office. And most of the time they ride on that money. That means they go to conferences. It's funny how those conferences are always in New Orleans or Las Vegas. You know, it's just funny how they're in something. They never go to a conference that's in Newark, New Jersey. They always go to these conferences that they just have to go to in these nice party towns. Now, you say, well, Dale, what's the problem with that? Well, what would happen if a district just, you know, like one that I worked in, told principals don't hire substitutes, just have teachers covered, just rotate the coverage so they won't, you know, we can't get sued over not providing their planning time, but don't ever hire substitutes, hire teachers, you know, use teachers on planning to cover those subs, we'll get that money. And the central office never dispersed that money back out to the schools. They always kept it for their own, you know, for their own enjoyment to get to travel on. I worked in a district that did that on a regular basis. The superintendent eventually got fired over that, thank goodness, but that was a common thing. So when we start talking about leftover money and fund balance and discretion and those things, that becomes an ethical problem as well. What do we do to make sure we generate that unused money? Does it happen naturally, or do we set upon a series of conditions and tell principals, don't you hire substitutes? We're going to take the money from the teachers for their sick day or their personal day, but we're not going to hire substitutes because we get to use that. We get that unused money. And in a fairly large district, that's a lot of money, a lot of money. You say, well, Dale, that's just, you know, what is it? Back then, this has been a while back, let's say it's $55 a day or something like that we would be paying that sub. But they get a sick day costs you as a teacher, as you know, 1/20th of your salary that month. So it's a lot more than $55. It's a couple $100 for every day. You got a couple of thousand of those every month. We start talking about some serious money. Even in a district that, you know, in a district that I worked in that had 14,000 students, that was about $4 million a year. And that's when money was real money. That's like $8 million now. And that's how the central office got to go to all the conferences they wanted to go to in all the glamorous cities, was that we didn't hire substitutes, so that we had unused funds. But were they really unused, or did we create them? So these are the kinds of ethical things that come up in terms of using money as well. That's an example of something bad. And we can see that, no, we shouldn't be doing that. But on this, it's the same argument on the other side. The superintendent, he was on the side of the angels. He had a just cause, but it's still illegal either way, regardless of the outcome. The ethical piece is the ethics of the profession. No, you know, it was bad to you know, make teachers cover classes and steal their money. But either way, it's illegal. You got to understand that piece of this. Very good. All right, group 3, we got Kitty, Ashley, Claire, and Larry. Tell us something new.
All right, I think Kitty's going to share her screen for us.
Excellent.
It'll work out better for a group this week. Awesome. So there's really, we were going to cover, you know, the backdrop of the case, but I feel like we're all pretty well aware of that case at the moment. So probably just skip over that if everybody's okay with that. So as far as our legal concerns, we really were thinking, okay, the plan could be appropriate just because it was intended to cover kind of kids that were higher risk, which is a little bit more financially dependent and more expensive to meet those needs. And that other schools maybe could have other funding sources such as fundraisers or, you know, anything, PTOs, the parking lots, anything like Dr. Caton was saying earlier. The superintendent was trying to be transparent and attempting to be equitable with that dispersion of money. However, it really falls to the inappropriate side just because who knows where that money truly is going. It doesn't really follow the student. So if the student transfers schools, that money is not going to go with that student. Like he's saying, it's going to follow the students. It really just tends to make like an imbalance of those funds. And it doesn't focus anything really where it needs to be. And I second most of what everyone said tonight, as far as why it is inappropriate. However, I feel like going back to having other people support that, like, is that from the school improvement team? Is that from the county commissioners? Who helped get that to where it needs to be? And I know we're not supposed to get distracted in the fluff of those, but for me, I feel like, or for our group, I feel like it is most definitely illegal, but how did it get that far? So. You're muted.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, so is it equitable to take money from one child to meet the needs of another child because they are from a more affluent family or county? So that's the inappropriate. We don't feel like that. I mean, we knew after reading the case and things like that, when we got to this point, the plan can be, you can argue that the plan's appropriate, but we just felt like you needed to discuss more of the inappropriate. So is it fair just because somebody was born into a more affluent family that you're taking money from them and not offering that sound, equitable education? And then for this, this is Larry's. The same thing here is that it's already been decided. The principal of contact will explain the process. However, is that input from all the stakeholders, just from the pilot group, and the states decides you cannot distribute you cannot distract, so not appropriate. You can't just decide where you want to put those funds. So even though it's we can argue the appropriate, we know it's the inappropriate. So we weren't even going to discuss why it's the appropriate side.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can, Larry.
All right. What we did with this slide is we basically referenced some stuff from chapter 2 in the book. We know it's inappropriate, but some of the things that we discussed, that we looked at and saw in the book would be like site-based budgeting, the authority given that principle, the ability to allocate various line items in the budget, having the staff work with each other as far as, that instructional setting, helping set priorities and, being able to allocate funds. And then, the big thing would be getting the stakeholders involved, encouraging and promoting cooperation amongst all the stakeholders. Then you got, this empowers the admin decisions for the allocation of money to programs, positions that impact students. And this is known as matching the needs with resources. Okay. And then it goes down and it talks about SBB, site-based budgeting, allocations determined simply on the number of students and special needs students and other metrics, not related to performance data. And then on the inappropriate side of it, the system's time sensitive. The resources must be distributed equitably. Again, admin and stakeholders have to work together, make sure the stakeholders are invested in each site. And then the districts would have to know where the resources are being distributed and to which site. Funding based on the school type, stipulation, or how funds are allocated. It goes on to talk about the flat grant formula, the state aid per pupil, basically the total state revenue with the number of students in each state. It's unfair. It doesn't consider the community that are wealthier and the communities that are not as wealthy and enrollment, et cetera. And, with the inappropriate side of it as well, states still are having issues as far as the methodology to distribute resources. And you look at things like lack of funding, the demand of meeting the needs of the disaggregated groups, and the lack of consolidation of the school district.
Okay.
So then to wrap that up, like we've already said, with the other groups, this was unintentional wrongdoing. It did look good on paper, sound good on paper, but having to think about the big picture of oversight and input, it would be an illegal move of money, because that is just not up to the local school districts to do.
That is correct. All right, if y'all will go back to your first slide for me, please. I want to make a quick point on flat grant funding that I made earlier, and I want to use your slide to do it so quickly so people make sure we understand. I'm sometimes not as clear as I think I am. Keep on going back.
That one.
Go forward one. Here we go. This is the one. So over here on the left-hand side of your screen where it says a huge disparity between the wealthiest and poorest counties. Now, when it's talking, when what is listed here is 3,200. That's what the local county commissioners can add to per pupil. If the wealthiest 3,200, the poorest 755. That's in addition to the flat grant that the state gives to educate kids. Your state allotted money per pupil expenditure. So right now that expenditure is right at $8,000. So in that 32, this money is actually in 1990s money. That this is closer to 4,000 right now. That's what I was talking earlier. But what we'll use is 1990s money when this case was adjudicated. At that time, Charlotte Mecklenburg was spending about $3,200 per pupil, and the state was given $7,000. So they were ending up with $10,000 or a little bit more. The lowest district, $755. That's how much local money they could spend. Again, what they wanted is for the state not to give Charlotte Mecklenburg, but instead of giving them $7,000, to give them $5,000 and take that extra $1,000, add it to that, so that they would both end up with about, with about $8,000, or that so they wouldn't end up with Charlotte Mecklenburg with 10 and them with 7. That's the notion here. Is flat grant means the state sends the same amount per pupil regardless, and then when you add the local money that the local county commissioners are willing to tax themselves and allot to the schools, in the end you have a discrepancy. But Leandro said the law, there's no right that in the end that both funding be equal. Even though the state funded started out, in the end it doesn't end up equal because of the local money. But make sure you understand that. All right, you can stop your slide now. And one more point I want to make before we get to our last group, and I'm going to go back to our resident principals again. In the book, it's referred to as Larry covered there, school-based budgeting. In North Carolina, we call that site-based management. It's the same thing. In North Carolina, it's referred to as site-based management. All right, so we have some of that. The problem, as Dr. Caton pointed out earlier, is it's not consistent. Well, what do you mean, Dale? It's not consistent. What we'll do is we'll tell principals, you have site-based management. If you're no longer, once you get through your initial years as a principal and you're no longer probationary in a district, and you no longer have a mentor, and you get that second or third, usually it's that third contract after you've been with the district of at least 4 years, and you've proven that you're not likely to stick a penny in a light socket or do something else idiotic to harm yourself. They'll give you the ability to do site-based management. The problem is you never know what things you have control over and what you don't. And that's what Dr. Caton was pointing out earlier. The district sometimes takes that authority away from you. She would like to be a part of Title I and direct those funds to certain kids, but the district said, no, you don't get to make that decision. We've made that one for you already. And one of the things that I noticed in my second principalship in Charlotte Mecklenburg, when I got to be one of those that didn't have to, have a warder or a minder, is I had supposedly all this site-based authority, but the money was never there. They'd already made that decision somewhere else in the central office. And so in the end, about all I could ever do was maybe trade some positions, but they put a limit on those, on your trades. And so the notion of that there is this great autonomy for principals, I did not find that to be the case. It was only on paper only. It looked good on paper, but by the time it got to me, these things had already been decided, and I didn't have a lot of that site-based management leeway to do a lot of the things that we claim that we're allowed to do with our money. Now, being at one very low wealth district or school in the district, I had a lot of leeway. I just didn't have any money to fund it. Again, going back to PTA, PTO, and those things, I had 1,000 ideas of what I wanted to do. I just had no money to do it. So yeah, I had the discretion to do it, just didn't have any money to do it. And so that is the bottom line on site-based management. What our book calls school-based budgeting is, you can have all the ideas you want, but if you have no money, or if somebody in the central office has already earmarked or spent that money on something else or somebody else, just like Dr. Caton's Title I money has already been spent on elementary schools. And so she, sorry, that's not your call to make. Then there's not a lot of that discretion. So I'll let the two resident principals speak to that, their experiences with site-based management.
Well, Dr. Lamb, it made me think of, I'm sure you remember freedom and flexibility with responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember receiving a really nice letter congratulating me. It was my 3rd year as a principal, that I now could be a part of that program.
Right.
However, that lovely letter I received never explained what that meant. And it certainly didn't come along with any sort of funding.
That is
and
correct.
So, okay, I have that, but it's pretty much meaningless to me. It really never had an impact on how I did my business.
That's just it. Basically, what we're saying is part of the lawsuit, and part of what has happened is principals are supposed to have some budgetary discretion at their schools in order to try to meet the needs of diverse learners and harder to educate kids, except there's never any money that comes with it. Now,
Right.
They won't let you in your first contract, your first 2 or 4 year contract. You do not, by state design, have that authority, as Dr. Maraglia said. But when you sign that second contract, either at 2 or 4 years, after 2 or 4 years, according to what your district gave you to begin with, and if it's a first time principalship, you get a 2. If you've been principal somewhere else, you generally get a 4. But after that initial contract, you all of a sudden have this authority legally vested in you, that you now have this ability to differentiate funds. But they never tell you what funds, or they never give you any money. And if you ever ask, they've already spent that money, or they've earmarked it for something else. But that's part of this as well. Again, looks good on paper, but in practice, in theory it looks good on practice, not so much.
Right.
Dr. Caton?
Okay, so maybe we're different in Pitt County schools. From day one, first principles, you get your allotments and you get your budget and you get your school allocations. I can share that if people would like to see it. It's from instructional supplies, local and state. It's for printer. It's for office supplies. It's for principal travel. It's for, I'm trying to think, all the different line items. And of course, you're going to, for me, you spend the state money first, because in case the state comes back and say they want it, you say, oh, too bad, it's already gone. So that, you have to be careful. You have capital money, or at least we do. It's not much. Of course, we don't have any textbook money anymore. You don't have any professional development money anymore. So that's already out there, and that's what we get. For me, also you have your in-house general accounts. I'm very, very peculiar with my money, meaning that because I don't get all this extra money, I do lots of different things. I don't know if I've told this class. One thing I do is I sell my teachers and students bloods to make money. I'm not gonna lie. Blood Connection gives you money, $10 a pint of blood. I do as many as I can do. I think if you do 3 in a year, you get an extra $1,000. And so, yeah, I do that. And that's money that I can be a little bit more flexible with. So that means I can use it to buy a lunch for the teachers and things like that. So, and I look at that. I ask, I look at both of my money, all my monies, my in-house. I ask for a report every week for my payroll lady or for my bookkeeper. I ask for my state and local, all that printed off pretty much every week as well. I want to see exactly what's going on and what's spent. But pretty much my money is spent by January, February.
Yeah.
So.
And what Dr. Caton was just talking about is, there's 4 different types of money. There's federal, there's state, there's local, and there's school monies. She's talking about you have a lot of flexibility in your local budget with your school money. You have more flexibility with local money. But because of the Leandro decision, you're supposed to have some site-based management capability with state money. But that's what we're talking about here. But it never ends up being, you supposedly, according to the law, have all this flexibility, but you never get it. There's never any money behind it, or they never tell you, or the district has already made the decision for the district how they're going to spend that money, and so you don't get to manipulate it. You do have a lot more discretion on how you use your local money and your school money, and I should say school monies, because most of the time, like Dr. Caton, she's got 2 accounts at least. Might have a third one at the local level, but she and the financial secretary signed. But part of the Leandro case is that we were supposed to give some site-based management capability to principals with state monies. That's why I said the only thing that I ever remember that I was ever able to do as a experienced principal with state money, they would let me trade some state positions around a little bit. I didn't end up with any more than I had, but I could try to tailor my faculty more to the clientele that I had. But they even put a limit on your trades. The district said you couldn't have more than 3 per year. But that was the most flexibility I ever got. But every time I would ask something else about where's this flexibility with this state money, can I do this? The answer was no, we've already done this with it, or we've already decided that, or there is no money for that. The only discretionary monies I ever had mostly were school or local. I never could get in on that gravy train that was supposedly out there because of Leandro, that supposedly that there was money, that state money that I had some discretion over. I never saw it. As far as I know, I never saw it. And so that sounds kind of like one of those things that Forrest Gump said, but that's about right. I couldn't figure it out. It never happened for me anyway. And my understanding is like Dr. Maraglia said, that they're always, you can do this, but you never know what it is. And so it doesn't happen. So the notion of this great amount of discretion with budgets, your local budget that you like, selling blood or you're selling candy or doing whatever you do, you have some discretion over that money. But, I'll tell you, I was a candy seller. We did blood drives, but I was a candy seller. I had a room on campus. And, it's like a loan shark. I'm the one that sold the candy to the teachers. And that's what we did. But you had to do what you had to do to make money. All right, we have one group that's left. Is that right? Group 4. Is that where we're at now? Our first group that went last week, Heather and Cammie and Cyrus and Todd and Drew.
All right, I will attempt to share my screen here. You would think that after a year of teaching on Zoom, I'd be a little more efficient at it.
Yeah, that assumes that it works the same every time, but it doesn't, unfortunately.
Okay, so I know at this point we've pretty much covered all of the logistics of the Leandro case, but just a couple of things to add. In our presentation, we just put a couple of pieces from the general statutes that pretty much are, this is the heart of the Leandro case.
Yes.
It is the duty of the state, not the duty of the districts, the counties. It is the state's responsibility to ensure that the students are getting their education. Those opportunities for that education are to be equal, but the funding, the resources for those opportunities are not going to necessarily be equal, and they won't be equal. That's the gist of the Leandro case. One other thing in just talking about the background of the Leandro case was in talking about students in North Carolina, their right to a sound basic education. What that includes are teachers, competent, certified, well-trained. They know the standard course of study. That also includes having a well-trained, competent principal who is able to manage a school and who is able to maintain those quality teachers, and that they are to have those resources, all of the students are to have those resources necessary to support an effective instructional program, including those who are at risk. So I don't think that those three things were mentioned. I'm trying to think of things that have not already been discussed, but those were just specific components of that sound basic education. Here's a little bit more of the more recent legislative happenings regarding the Leandro case. Even though after the rulings, the state still has failed to meet its constitutional duty in providing that sound basic education. And I think that, I don't remember which group it mentioned, the West Ed report that came out just a couple of years ago. And that kind of gave the state a set of things that they needed to focus on in order to meet that constitutional requirement. But I was reading, and I can't remember where I read it, there actually has been some recent discussion on Judge Lee, who I believe he is the only, like he is solely been assigned to just focus on this.
That is correct.
There's some contention between him and the legislature, between him and the General Assembly, about this concern of him potentially trying to say that there needs to be a certain dollar amount, or that he is going to try and say there are certain things that the legislative branch needs to do. And the General Assembly is giving him some potential pushback on that.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was kind of interesting, just to talk about how there's this, the balance of powers in trying to address this constitutional requirement. There's contention between those two branches of our state government and how to go about fixing this. So I don't remember where I read that, but it happened, I believe, in April, May. It was just a couple of months ago, but when I was doing research for this, I came across that. But again, that's the gist of the Leandro proceedings. And Cammie, I'm gonna turn it over to you now.
Okay, so just what we were talking about, everybody's basically already said this, that his intentions may be seen by the public as good. It's against the law, and that's the bottom line. So in that, what we discussed with this is, like, when I went and sat down with my principal about budgets and hours, he just very specifically told me that basically what you're referencing a moment ago, that it might seem as though there's flexibility, but he told me the same thing that Caton just said. Am I saying your name correct, Dr. Caton? He told me that actually that he does the same thing she does every week. He has his, our bookkeeper print things out, and he has to check them off. And at the end of each month, they actually both have to sign and send to county office. Every single dollar has to be accounted for, where and how it's spent. Like, even their, what we call their free money, how they can spend, how they feel like they should be able to spend it. He said technically that's also not true, that any money that comes into the school has to be accounted for. And for his budget, how he was discussing with me, as far as in-school funds, like he said he threw out, he said, like say 50,000, and then 25 is used for instructional. The other 25 he sends to SIT team for teachers to request. Even when the teachers request, the money that's allocated out to teachers for their request have to be to best meet the needs of the larger population of the students within the school. So like there was a discussion about like band, why didn't they get their money before, and then science received they received all this money for microscopes and stuff like that. And the principal explained to me is that, well, because you're only going to have a certain population of students is going to have access to that band equipment and stuff, whereas most all of your students are going to touch those microscopes. And so he said whenever he has money, that's what he has to consider every single time is, okay, what's going to meet the most needs within the school. And so in this, I feel like you get muddy water when you try to basically decide a student's worth, because I know as a parent, I hear other parents' discussions about stuff like this. And so if you start saying that it kind of is more equitable to do it on, if it's 180 days, well, 185 now, but like you get $1 for a day and a student's only there 80 days, well, they're only going to be given $80. That's it, period. But if you start saying, okay, well, this student's worth this student's worth that, I feel like going to really upset some parents, and some parents are going to say, okay, well, my kid might not be high risk, but they still, they still need their needs met as well. And how is it that you can determine that child is worth more for more money to be spent on, even though we all said we understand and we know that those students need a little bit more in resources. The bottom line is it's tricky when you come down to people's money and how it's because they're going to say it's their money because it's tax money. And so they're going to start throwing that out about the free and equal, and that equity is not going to be present when you start saying one child's more valuable than the other. And everybody's okay with it as long as it's their child that's being held as more valuable.
Yeah.
When they get mad is when it's not their kid that's included in that equation. So in this, we said, that he's not doing something that's okay, because my principal also said that the state gives Buncombe County the budget, and then the superintendent gives them and how we can spend money, and all that has to be accounted for. And he said, and at the end of the month, I have to check everything. He said, I check it like 4 and 5 times. He said, because my name is going on that line at the end of each month. And I have to, like, my name. He said, it's not my bookkeeper's name. He said, he said, even though she is signing it as well, he said, it's really on me. And so for this, I brought up the point of, well, if he's doing this, are the principals, not saying, well, I thought that was against the law. Why are they not questioning him and saying, or is this legal? And then, I mean, we kind of felt like we would get in trouble, but I said, I would be the person who would kind of skirt around him and ask maybe a financial officer, I don't know, state superintendent, chief financial officer of the organization, but to say, is this legal for him to be doing this? Because when it's your butt on the line, it's your butt on the line. And so you can't just sometimes blindly go where people lead you. Sometimes you've got to just be able to stand up and say, I don't think that this is okay or right or legal. So that's what we said here is that, he is concerned with equity. He's trying to give that, but bottom line, it is against the law. He is trying to do a good job building those relationships, but that also might backfire, like I said, on that parents are going to start saying, okay, well, how are you judging this? And how are you determining that you're basically determining worth on ability? And that's muddy water, I felt like, because then you could even have some high flyers who you say, okay, well, you're not meeting their needs to continue to grow them to the next level. And so in this, we said that's where we said that where you could see it where the principals expressed their concern. And he was trying to be transparent and trying to throw that all out on the line, but I felt like that also would backfire big time.
So
That's
what
only
can
new
we,
to me. That's the only new stuff I can think of that wasn't mentioned.
Yeah. So what Cammie was just mentioning is nobody can give you permission to break the law. What she's talking about is a principle. Is this legal? No, it's not legal. And just because your superintendent said we're going to do this doesn't mean that you won't get caught in a jam as well. That's an excellent point to remember here is you know, the superintendent is doing something here that's illegal, just like the one in Chapel Hill Carborough did. You don't want to get caught up in that. You got to follow the superintendent, but you don't want to get caught up. If you know something's illegal, you have a duty not to follow through and do that. It puts you in a hard situation sometimes. That is correct. All right. Continue. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh no, Todd's next.
All right.
Well, I mean, I actually was probably going to end this, but I know Heather and Drew have some things to say too. I'll just say my piece because it kind of bounces off what Cammie was saying anyway, with the role of the principal in this, because most of the question really had to do with how legal, or illegal what the superintendent was doing. But in the master's degree training that we're getting and the master's degree we're going for, eventually we're hoping to be principals, assistant principals, and that's the first step moving forward for us. And to be that principal that has to be in the position, we kind of were asking the question to you, and you just kind of answered it, but of what do we do as principals in this case? Because you're not knowing the law doesn't make you immune to it, and you're still operating it under it. So if you sniff it that it's illegal, you sniff it that there's something wrong. We went back and forth saying, hey, we got to say something. You got to go to the school board and say something. You got to say something to maybe the state superintendent or whatnot. But also, like, once you do say something, like, I know there's laws to protect you from this, but at the same time, when does the blackballing start? When do you get blacklisted? And the idea of being that principal that doesn't go with it, it seems to be we just kind of went back and forth with, none of us said we would sit and do it. But at the same time, there's a difference between the principal getting the money and then the principal at the school that's like not getting the money. And both of them, really should be speaking up. And I don't know how often this happens. And I don't know how often, like, actually the principals speak up in these situations. So I guess we were interested in, the common nature of what the question is. When we were dealing with inappropriate activities that you could 2 weeks ago lose your house for, last week we could go to jail. This week we're interested in, like, how often do these happen? Because after our case studies and classes, we've all been going back to our principals and asking them questions every week, to try to get clarification on some of this stuff. To be honest, this has been the scariest 3 weeks that I think I've had in the course so far. So if I'm to see something like this, how often does this come by? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Absolutely. It happens more it happens more than we'd like to. And there's a simple fix though. As I said, the latest case was in Chapel Hill Carborough, where the superintendent went off the beam, misspent $1 million, contracted with the company to get around what the Leandro ruling in Chapel Hill Carborough. And the parents rose up and to the school board, and of course that's what happened. The recourse in something like this is before the checks ever get sent out, the school board is going to have to approve it. And if the school board approves it, which they can't, but if they send you the check as a principal, you make sure that you sit down with the superintendent, and the superintendent is the secretary to the school board, and we make sure that we send them the copy of our budget. Remember, We have to send them the copy of our budget. You know, you had to find that budget. Does it have all your funds? You have to develop your budget on what they're going to give you, and you have to send it back, and it has to get approved. Once it gets your budget gets approved, you're indemnified. You're good to go.
Okay.
You know, that's the beauty of how we started the course. The very first activity was find your local school budget. Does it have all 4 in it? And once that's been approved, you submit that. That's been approved. You know, if it was spent illegally, that's the superintendent and the board. That's not you. That's why you check your balances every week. You have a budget. Now, back to what we were talking about earlier, and one of the things that Kimmy brought out, just like she's in Buncombe County. It's a fairly big county. It includes Asheville. Now, Asheville has its own city system, but it's a big place. Now, I worked in 2 low wealth districts and I worked in 2 high wealth districts. And I can tell you in the 2 low wealth districts that were fairly small, I think of 13 and 14,000 students for them. You raised all the money you wanted to raise, you spent any way you wanted to. In the 2 high wealth districts that I worked in, and I showed you this a couple of weeks ago, you had to submit a plan for fundraising and how you were going to spend every penny of it so that it would all benefit all the students. As Cammie was pointing out, I mean, you can't spend money on, it was said earlier, you can't spend money on Microsoft. You need to spend money on Microsoft rather than band because it affects more students. But in Wake and Mecklenburg, you even your local money, you had to have it approved how you were going to spend it. You know, that's the thing that you've got to remember is you submit a budget, and once it's approved, you're good to go. The problem is when you step outside of your own budget. So let's go back and look at that. Let me share my screen. I'm going to stop this. I want to go back to, and pardon me for not having this already ready for you. And so when we go back to our materials, can y'all see my screen now? All right, role of principal crisis spot, court cases, school budget laws. This is what we're referring to. And again, please pardon me for not already having this one loaded. All right, so here's all the budget laws that you have to follow, that your budget has to follow. You submit it. But see here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, they have fundraising at the middle and high school, and you have to, it tells you what you can, that all fundraising has to be approved by the principal, what it can be, what it can't be. Use of funds raised shall be used to benefit school programs. What we were talking about earlier, can't be used for one-off programs. It has to hit the most kids. It has to be used for projects designated prior to the fundraising. That means you had to submit your budget and your potential fundraising. It all had to be approved. There was no discretion at all in Charlotte, and it tells you that right here. And it tells you that you had to get approval from the superintendent. Let me stop my share. You had to get approval from the superintendent through your budget. When you submitted your budget, it had to be approved. You couldn't just raise as much money as you want, spend any way that you wanted to. It had to be spent on the things that had been approved. So those 2 districts, Wake and I'm sure Buncombe is the same way, very tight. Smaller districts, you know, if you can have a carnival affair, you know, a womanless wedding, a donkey basketball game, a barbecue, whatever you can have to raise money. You can spend it ever how you want to, but not so much in the big districts. But you need to protect yourself even in the small districts by making sure that you got it projected in your budget and what you're going to spend it for. And once that's approved, the you know, that indemnifies you as the principal. So that's the question that you're asking. That's how you get that indemnification. That's how you protect yourself. That there's nobody can claim that you misspent the money or you hid the money or you ran off to Gulfport, Mississippi with the money. You know, that actually happened in my career. We had a fellow that ran off to Gulfport absconded with the money. And so, you know, that's it. But you should be cautious. You should be cautious. Now, one more point, and we'll get to the last. We have a couple more people who want to speak from the last group. One of the things we have to be careful of, and I'm going to use Cammie and Kitty. One of the things you have to be careful of is thinking that everybody's the same in the same district, even if they physically look similar. Ladies, would you say that the communities look fairly similar in Irwin Hills and in Inca? Kitty, you're muted. Tell us what I'm talking about.
Well, I'm learning not in summer school. I always thought we were more similar than we are, but we're not.
You're not
as similar.
You might
No.
look similar physically,
Right.
appearance-wise, but I'll guarantee you that those are two completely different communities, having worked in both of them myself.
Yes.
Been around
Very
them.
much so.
But they visually, you know, I always tell the story. My wife was cheerleading coach at Union Mills, and when they'd go down to Mount Vernon, I mean, they were literally the different sides of the same coin. But you were, they thought that they were 4 miles apart as the crow flied, and they'd fight in that little gym in that dusty parking lot. It'd just be dust boiling. I'd have to escort her and her cheerleaders in and out. It was just, they couldn't have been more dissimilar. And so the notion that we can get some kind of consensus in a district when we start varying the money, even though you might physically by sight look similar, you'll find that different communities have different values, and they value different things and value them different. And the biggest mistake that we can say is it's easy to tell the difference in Charlotte Mecklenburg between Cornelius and Cornelius Elementary School and Druid Hills. We talked about it last week. It's easy to tell the difference, or Villa Heights. One is all white, one is all black. Anybody can see the difference in those. But what happens is this notion that because they physically look similar, or their economics might be similar, that we think that they want the same things or they believe the same things. That is not true. And so we have to develop, why that's important, we have to develop our local budgets as principles that reflect the values of our community as well. And we must keep the consent of the governed, is what we call that in legal terms. We have to make sure that, you know, if you want to draw a big crowd to school in Eastern North Carolina, you have a donkey basketball game. In Piedmont, you have a barbecue. In Western North Carolina, you have a womanless wedding. Again, they raise money, but different things attract different clienteles. And you've got to make sure that your local fundraising matches that, and what you spend the money on that reflects the values of your school community. You do get some choice in those smaller communities, but all that has to be approved. But back to Todd's question, that's how you protect yourself. You know what your community, you know what they like, what they want money spent on. You get it approved. You have it all in your local budget. The superintendent, the school board votes on, approves your budget. You're golden. You're indemnified. Your parents are happy. The problem comes is when you want to do things with your money that they don't want. That's when it gets ugly. But that's a great question. All right, we have other folks from that group who want to speak. Let's see. We have Drew, Heather. Anybody else from that group want to add in on that presentation?
I was just going to add that, and it's already been mentioned, but just in a discussion I had with my principal, you can't rob Peter to pay Paul.
That's
so
correct.
If the money is already earmarked and delegated, whether it's state funds, local funds, no matter what it is, it is what it is. And if you've delegated it to be spent a certain way, then that's where it's going to be spent. There is no other option.
Right. I mean, and that's right. I mean, if you give one, you take from the other. It's a zero-sum game. And you can't rob Peter to pay Paul. That's never a good system. That even goes back to that story I told about when I worked in one of the Western North Carolina counties where you didn't hire substitutes so that the central office could ride on that money. That's robbing Peter to pay Paul. You don't think that didn't hurt our instructional programs? That we never had subs, and teachers were covering on their planning, and they didn't have time to plan and just come in and give out worksheets because they were having to teach all day long already. And you say, well, that probably as good as a sub, but what about in their own classes? They felt like they were being taken advantage of. How well did they teach their own classes, much less the ones they were subbing in? So you were robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's an extraneous example, but that's part of it too. But yeah, you spend money as it was in your approved budget. For me, I liked the notion that I had protection, that I knew exactly what, as I said, I was in the candy business, and that way I didn't have to worry about 1,000 different kinds of fundraisers. Candies was in the candy business. I knew how much I was going to buy, I knew how much I was going to sell, I knew how much money I was going to make before the year ever even started. But when you get into perishable things like citrus, selling oranges, stuff like that, ooh. You get PTAs involved selling stuff, and they have all these grandiose plans, but that's all they have is plans. They expect somebody else to do the work. Ooh. So the notion is this, we have this universal thought that if we don't have a PTA or a PTO, or if we don't have active parents, that's a bad thing. It's also, if you've got a little bit of hustle to you and you can raise money, it also keeps people out of your way and from stealing it or misspending it as well. I hate to say that, but it's not always a bad thing. I mean, I always figured I could raise more money than they could. I'll just tell you, I could raise more money than they could, and they didn't. And then I could try to make sure that reflected in the budget that we were doing the most good for the most kids. One of the schools I worked at along the way, and one of the smaller districts is the well-to-do parents wanted to do the fundraising, but they just wanted to be in charge. They didn't want to do the work, but then they wanted the money only spent on their kids. In the gifted program, they only wanted the money spent on them. You don't have to deal with any of that either if you don't have a PTO or a PTA. In modern times, if I had a choice, I'll bet on me. I believe I can raise the money myself. I'll do without them if we're going to get into all that partisan stuff. And see, and that stuff is out in the open now. It's the gloves are off. In communities that have different demographics, the gloves are off now. And so sometimes it's better not to have to deal with that. Anybody else have anything else on our presentations tonight? Well, this week, as I told you, let me share my screen. Let me go back to these again. I want to make sure that we understand. Do a share here. I can close that one. I can close that one. I've got one more. Where is it? Here it is. Last week, our case study was on intentionally did the wrong thing. This week, we'll give the superintendent the benefit of the doubt. He unintentionally did the wrong thing. He did an illegal thing. And then there's a lot of it doesn't matter that he had the best of intentions. And I'm betting that everybody sitting on this Zoom tonight doesn't believe he had the best of intentions. But even if he did, the thing that he did was illegal. We'll get to the third. This one will be kind of the central theme. Our next case study is going to have a component of all three of these, and then our last one will be the non-feasance. Intentionally did not act when they had a duty to act. We'll get to that one. But the one that's coming up, Jimmy and Willie, we are normal too. It's one ripped from the headlines. It's LGBTQ. Jimmy and Willie are gay. And we're going to proceed through that one because it is relevant to what we've got going on. But there's going to be each of the three elements of malpractice involved in the one next time. But so you need to read it carefully. You need to follow it through. But again, we're going to follow the law. We can't let our own personal opinion of Jimmy and Willie and their community shade what we do. We have to remember what the law is, and that we always follow the law. And Todd pointed out, first he was going to lose his house, and then he was going to go to jail. And so the whole notion of this course is how to avoid those things, but also get you to the point where you don't have that anxiety about doing your job because you have a good notion of how the things are supposed to work. And if you don't, you have somebody in your district that you can go to for legal issues and these things and how to protect yourself. I mean, you can only do the job till you can stay in the job. So, you know, I hate to be this mercenary about it, but we have to be. Sometimes you make mistakes and that end your career before you ever get them started. We don't want those things to happen to you. We want you to follow the law. And we also want you to be ethical in it as well. All right, anybody else have anything for the good of the group? Resident principals, either you have anything, that word of wisdom to close us out tonight?
I just want to say nice job tonight, everybody.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, very nice job.
You focused on the central theme tonight. Was it legal or not? Didn't
Yep.
let all the fluff get in your way. I've had groups that came in and argued that absolutely this was the right thing for the superintendents to do. You know, the social justice warriors. Well, I won't argue with you, but it's not legal. And so you focused on what was important tonight. Is it legal or not?
Yep.
And that, and once you can delineate that, then you, again, great job tonight. Really pleased and very impressed tonight. Very good. All right, anybody have anything else? I'm turning your work around. Your evidence work is great. I have no issues with that. You're getting the scores you deserve. I'm telling you, it's just easy. Once you get in the process and figure it out, kind of get in the habit, get in the rut, it's just going really well. You know, your case study picked up this week, very good. Your discussion boards have been good. Your OMA work has been very good. We'll talk next week about launching some of you into the SCIP if you want to. In the meantime, be focused on your task stream competency folio, getting those artifacts. And again, your two resident principals are expert at that, and they will love to help you. All right, if nothing else, I'll see you next Wednesday. We got one more week before our break. See you then. Good night, everybody.